So, hello and good day to everyone joining us from all across the world. And on behalf of the Academy, I'm Praveen Chopra, and as chair of the Academy's Scientific Advisory Committee, it is indeed my privilege to welcome all of you to this episode of Conversations with the Academy. Today, with the spotlight on Latin America, we are also pleased that colleagues from the region are actively engaging in this conversation, and we've had a phenomenal registration. Hope people can join us during this conversation. Now, that we live in an interdependent world is an ethos which has been ingrained in scientists, philosophers, and politicians over the years. But recent times, and all of us have acutely felt that, have accentuated the increasingly syncretic dynamics needed for optimization of healthcare systems and indeed the global economy. This realization from recent experiences have underscored the demand for dispensing with traditional mindsets, policies, and practices, and more critically, break down the barriers between stakeholders if we are to achieve our aspiration of improving patient community outcomes globally. We have witnessed that it is feasible for traditional industry rivals to collaborate to deliver, that it is possible for global data sharing with greater transparency without impeding intellectual property, that it is doable for regulators and the industry to engage in early dialogue and rolling reviews, and it is foreseeable that this innovation could be extended to future access of novel drugs for very sick patients. Next slide, Kit. And to guide us through this plethora of emerging scenarios, we are indeed fortunate to have a formidable faculty sharing their insights and expertise with us. But before we launch into the discussion, a few housekeeping notes of the session. We will follow a typical conversational format, so please feel free to ask questions and challenge the faculty. You will see a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Click on it, and we shall be monitoring that with the faculty and myself, and we shall certainly raise these questions in real time during the conversation. And also look out for the poll questions, just to feel the pulse of the audience. You will see poll questions coming in and introduced by each of the speakers. Feel free to answer, and that will really give us a feel of how the next level of the conversation can be engendered with the faculty. So please feel free and do come in whenever you want to or can. Next slide. So now allow me the privilege of introducing Silvia Bendina. She's moderating today's deliberations. Now, Silvia brings a rare passion and joie de vivre over 3 decades in the life sciences area, as she pursues her vision for driving cross-regional stakeholder partnering and leveraging her vast network to streamline regulatory pathways and market access, albeit with particular emphasis on Latin America, but given a global perspective, it's a win-win situation for everyone. And as a senior partner at the Wessex Consultancy, she has been instrumental in championing the cause she firmly believes in, and you can sense that in her interaction with her. And in fact, today's gathering is largely a fruition of her own initiatives. So thank you, Silvia. Thank you for driving our aspirations for today's critical conversation, and indeed for introducing our panelists. Over to you, Silvia. Thank you.
Thank you for that great introduction, Praveen. I appreciate it very much. And as Praveen said, my name is Silvia Bendina, Executive Partner at Wessex Global Consulting. And it's a pleasure to be here today at the IFAP Academy webinar. And as I would like to introduce now our guest speakers, I'm very honored that they are able to join us today. Dr. Larry Liberty, he's Adjunct Research Professor at Temple University School of Pharmacy. Miriam Loera, she's Director International Affairs at the Mexican Regulatory Agency, COFEPRIS, and Camila Gomez. She is Latin American Regulatory Policy Lead at Roche, representing FIPHARMA. But before I invite our first guest to the podium, I would like to take a few minutes to review a little bit of what's been happening in the healthcare landscape this past 2 years. Please, Keith, could you put on the first slide? Thank you very much. Well, we observed definitely a massive innovation in healthcare in human history. In addition to this, we experienced the development of COVID mRNA vaccine and other novel technologies. Then we saw a global quest. It was a global quest against the COVID-19 and the various virus variants. We perceived how virtual drug development became a must-do trend. In addition to that, regarding regulatory agencies, they were overwhelmed and challenged trying to meet all the different demands to approve vaccines and review data as it was generated. We also observed a remarkable global collaboration amongst regulatory agencies, trying to devise systems, methodologies, and pathways to adapt emergency use authorizations for prompt access to vaccines and other effective therapeutic innovations. In a nutshell, all in all, we continue still today to be active observers and key players in an unprecedented race to improve access to medical innovation and public health. With this said and done, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Larry Liberty. Thank you very much, Larry.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you to the organizers, to the IFAP Academy. It's always a pleasure to participate in these, and I'm really excited to be able to participate with such a great group of colleagues on this topic. Next slide, please. To get started, what we're going to do is conduct a poll. My topic is going to be innovation and how it's optimizing the LatAm regulatory landscape. But if you go to the next slide, he will launch a poll for us. It's a simple poll. And the question is this: access to innovative therapies can vary widely across regions. So when thinking about access to innovative therapies in the LatAm region, and by that I mean everything from Mexico all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, what do you think is the most important concept that we should be thinking about? Now, these are a little bit mutually exclusive, but try to pick one. Do you think there's good access comparable to the US and Europe? There's a lot of access diversity across countries? Do you think most countries do not have a regulatory pathway to encourage timely access, as Sylvia was talking about emergency use pathways and priority pathways? Do you think a regional regulatory approach may actually accelerate access? And when we're talking about access, we're talking about the regulatory component here. So take a couple of seconds. Keith will give us a countdown, but we have a little less than a minute for you to select one. And then Keith will give us the results. And we'll use that as a springboard for the conversation that I'll be leading now.
Okay.
Wow. So about 50% said C, and followed by number 2 is there's much access, and then number 3 down here. And nobody believed that there was good comparable access, which is probably the nut of our conversation today. So Keith, next slide, please. I'm going to talk about 2 broad areas today: how to realize the potential of what we call regulatory sciences to accomplish the goals that we'd like, and then some recent developments in the Latin American region, which is really an introduction to the next speakers, to Miriam and Camila. Next slide. Well, we talk about innovation, and I'm going to be talking about it a lot from the point of view of the regulatory agency, but there's also the flip side, which is the company, the sponsor. So why do regulators even care about innovation? It turns out that in many cases, there is a goal to use the regulatory influence and pathways to help benefit innovation. The highlighted orange texts here indicate some text from the International Coalition of Medicine's Regulatory Authorities, where they actually focus on the benefits of innovation, the role that a regulator can play with innovative pathways, and how to continually evolve and support innovative research. So what we're seeing here is a partnership between the regulator and other stakeholders to be able to promote innovation. So I'm going to focus on 3 ways that an agency can support innovation: by implementing what I call good regulatory science, by following international standards, and with this new concept of an innovation office. Next slide. So regulatory science is defined many different ways, but the MEB in the Netherlands talks about regulatory science in terms of being able to develop and validate standards and tools to facilitate good decision-making, to help evaluate, assess, and communicate things like the benefits and risks, and to use regulatory frameworks to advance knowledge of the system. So in other words, being able to communicate to stakeholders how a regulatory framework can be used efficiently and effectively. If we think about that in the context of LatAm, and we think about, are there the appropriate decision-making pathways? Is there a good way of communicating and assessing benefit risks for products? Are there good regulatory frameworks? We know that this varies by country, but that there's a move towards alignment. And the alignment comes from following international standards, the second point of this regulatory science discussion. Here are a number of international standards that I'm sure you're familiar with, but sometimes it's important to recognize that there's good consistency across these in general, that there's overlap and there's opportunities for agencies to follow these standards, irrespective of their maturity level. Not every agency can implement all of the aspects of ICH, for instance, but there will be those that are fit for purpose for that agency's role, for the way that they approach the assessment of medicines, new or generics. So there are international standards that can help guide the practice that then will stimulate innovation. But today we're talking about the Latin American region. And I'd like to talk specifically about the third item, which is establishing an innovation office. In LatAm, this is a really important novel concept that's taken ground. And the first of these offices was established by Cuba, by SECMED. And their goal was to develop a comprehensive regulatory framework to enable what they're calling the transition of novel products to clinical practice, then eventually into their population. It has become a bit of a driving force for national and regional biopharmaceutical innovation. And we know that the role of the regulator is, again, becoming one of a partner. And so there are many ways that a regulator and a sponsor, external experts, patients can all come together to stimulate innovation. But through the auspices of an innovation office, this becomes much clearer, much more refined, and much more dedicated. And this is a little bit of an introduction to Miriam's presentation, but Cofepris has taken a really bold initiative known as InnovaPris, and InnovaPris is actually a component of an Office of International Innovation, an area of being able to say, how do we actually stimulate what the agency is doing, what we can do best for our patient population in Mexico. Miriam will go into more detail here, but just to say that, as I mentioned, the concept of education, of innovation is becoming much more recognized in the Latin American region. And these kinds of initiatives are really key to that. Next slide. Now, this next slide that I'm going to show you illustrates a concept. It illustrates the proportion of innovative medicines. Now, this is that are reimbursed, so they made it through the regulatory and the reimbursement stages. Tends to be significantly lower in certain countries than in other countries. These particular authors in the Latin American Policy Journal recently highlighted Peru. But I actually think there's a success story here, that one should not look at Peru and say, oh my gosh, look at them at the far end. The data here are actually from 2016 and 2017. And if today we take a look at the Peruvian Regulatory Agency and how DGMID is going forward with regard to improving itself, we know that there's really good activities to bring regulatory science into the processes, to streamline the processes, to focus on things like reliance and other efficiencies. And it's here that we can find the benefits of implementing all of these aspects to bring innovation to the population. So just a few takeaways. We know that facilitating innovation is really important. And if we follow these three rules of implementing regulatory science and following international standards and establishing an innovation office, it'll become part of an agency's DNA. And we know that therefore LatAm regulators can be facilitators of innovation. And we think this is a really interesting time for us to be involved with all of this. So thank you very much. Next slide, and I'll hand it back to you, Sylvia.
I would like to introduce now Miriam to the podium, please.
Yeah, and before Miriam comes on, just to remind the audience that this is an opportunity to challenge. Larry has raised some good opportunity for us to be able to share and question, and I would welcome Sylvia, Miriam, Camila also to put in the thoughts here. And there's a Q&A box right at the bottom, so if you key it in and you can address it to anyone, we will have more time after that session as well. But feel free, real time. You know, sometimes spontaneity would be helpful, so keep in touch. Miriam, all yours.
Thank you, Praveen, and thank you, Sylvia. And next, okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be representing Cpp in this webinar, and thank you so much for IFA team, that great invitation. Today, I will be talking about the reliance and innovation to access a new medical products from Mexico's perspective. And next, please. Okay. Next is the question 2 for the poll. Why do you think the approval of vaccines against COVID-19 took under 2 years, when normally the process can take 10 and 15 years? Oh, the results all above. Yes, I think so. All the aspects is considered for this time. Well, I continue with the presentation. Next, please. Precisely for these emergencies or sanitary, in this case for the COVID-19, it's more important optimize the time for the authorizations. In this case, in Mexico, this process takes 180 calendar days in normal process. The sanitary procession, after the registration, but authorization, sanitary, and chemical review and medical. This authorization is important because the verification indicates the use and dosage the consistent with the presented in the clinical studies. And the technical experts determine the documentation and verify all requirements and fulfilled. And finally, the resolution is favorable, not favorable, or preventive. Indicates that additional information is required before a final response can be used. In COVID-19 experiences in Mexico, the process has been simplifications. Regulatory simplification is important because in times of health emergencies, such as the one we are currently experiencing, it cannot take more than 180 days to authorize as sanitary registrations, while the population is suffering. In 2020, derived from the COVID-19 pandemic, the need arises for Cpp to find ways to speed up the procedures for sanitary authorization, especially in those cases where medical supplies were needed in order to cope with the growing number of COVID-19 positive patients, or that could affect the national medicine supplies. Nonetheless, it was imperative to preserve the safety, efficacy, and quality. In pursuing this objective, several agreements were published in the official Gazette of the Federation, especially on March 19, 2021. An agreement containing a series of guidelines was published regarding the emergency use authorization, so that the time spent regarding and mentioned before on potential minimum reduced and 10 days of the 180 days to 10 days for the emergency authorizations. These guidelines cover emergency use authorization for sanitary permits for construction, health supplies, good manufacturing practices, operation notices, among others. Cpp recognized GMPs certifies for a strict authorities facilitating authorization process. These authorities like FDA, EMA. Well, this process was achieved by generating strategic work cells specialized in the detection of everything related to COVID-19, public health interests, neglected diseases, and finally, everything that is lagging behind due to the pandemic situation. Next. In order to carry out this type of process simplification, we need to be able to rely on the work that has been done by other regulatory agencies. To do so, we need to make sure that their procedures and requirements are the less equivalent to ours. This achieves through reliance. Reliance is the act whereby the national regulatory agencies is one jurisdiction may consider and give significant weight to evaluations performed by other national regulatory agencies. Our trusted institution in reaching its own decision. Well, reliance has 5 identified benefits, at least. The one is faster sanitary authorization, as stated before. Recognizing the methodology and other regulatory agencies allow Cofepris to reduce the time spent reviewing the documentation for each new innovative product, which in turn allows to reduce responsibility time. In this case, is the medical and chemical reviews. Research allows allocate to more strategic areas by reducing duplicated humans, financial, and technical resources can be freed up, thus is time distribution in areas that need them more. As a consequence of the new products can be introduced faster into the market, increasingly timely access to innovative treatments, with more options available to the public, shortage in medical supplies, and can be stayed off. All this can be achieved with this granting safety, efficacy, and quality. For regulatory harmonization, reliance is not only the first steps towards building a more consolidated international cooperation network. It's necessary based on the next step and the goal which working to achieve is regulatory harmonizations. This means that regulatory agencies work together to align technical requirements. In this framework, the establishment or convergence with international standards plays a key role, since it's the utmost importance to ensure that the regulations alignment is done and adopting the most stringent and scientifically sound standards, where not only trust plays a major role, but also the channeling of the process for sanitary authorization is indispensable for the regulatory agencies involved in this process, where the challenge is the harmonization from the administrative part to the national regulations among the stakeholders. It is essential to ensure that its standards is the highest and scientific sound one. All of this will eventually lead to the benefit showed the truly application of reliance. World and international regulatory linkage. Since its inception in 2001, Cofepris has always sought to foster a spirit of collaboration and trust among regulatory agencies. This collaboration gave us the tools that enable us to face the COVID-19 pandemic. Cofepris has established relationships with more 40 countries and is a member of 26 international forums, treaties, and organizations. Mexico is currently an observer member of ICH. However, Cofepris is working hard to qualify as a member of this important guideline for medicines for human use and improve the access of the medical products. Well, what about the expectation from key partners? Our expectation for our key partners can be summarized as reciprocity and this efforts for the optimization of the regulatory process. Cofepris is currently in a stage of transformation, ranging from regulatory simplification and harmonization to the application of new innovations methods, and mentioned as about by Larry in his presentation. The creation of the COFEPRIS Innovation and Training Center, where the main objective is establish a dialogue of the trust and rapprochement between the regulated and the regulator. And moving on to even more challenging topic for Mexico and our institution, COFEPRIS, today more than ever, is important to reduce the inequality gaps in access to health inputs such as vaccines and medicines in Latin America region. It's incredible to see that more than 183 million of people in the region don't have a strong and robust regulatory systems that allow their countries access to better health. In this slide, I show you the 8 national agencies with reference and accredited in recognizes for Pan American Organization Health and Organization Health is of Health in these Americas. This is important because 35 countries in the Americas, only 8 countries are recognized with this level in the whole continent. That agencies are FDA, Agencia Nacional de Vigilancia Sanitaria, is Brazil, ANMAT, Argentina, ISP, Chile, COFEPRIS, Mexico, HELP, Canada, CETMED, Cuba, INVIMA, Colombia. So are the only agencies regulatory with this level. This means that 27 countries in the Americas need to strengthen their regulator systems in order to have better access to health inputs. This is undoubtedly one of the main challenges in Latin America regions, where a significant political and social commitment in requirement to achieve these efforts. Well, after my thanks, in this conclusion, this pandemic has made evident the need for international cooperation and construction of trust bridges among regulatory agencies. 2 key concepts of regulatory policies stand up reliance on regulatory harmonizations. These 2 concepts intertwine to achieve better dialogue channels and understanding between stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam, for the great presentation. Camila, please go ahead, take the podium. Thank you.
Sylvia, before we move on, and just to, if you allow me, there are a couple of questions coming in. So maybe we'll throw in a few now, and then we'll come back to the conversation in the second, because this is very timely. And you know, even Larry can pitch in on some of the concepts that you brought in. But there is Emilio and Domenico are seeking a clarification and probably a challenge. The first one is we understood that, you know, I think under the EUA process or the emergency utilization, you've been able to bring in a shorten from 180 to 10 days. So I understand that so Emilio is actually asking that the approval of the vaccines is now taking, I guess, about 10 calendar days, correct? In Mexico?
Yes, it's correct, but new moleculars authorizations and new products.
Correct. So the question also is that in what could be an opportunity to actually reduce the 180 days in the traditional time frame to even less and bring in some parallel reviews and parallel opportunity, which is something that even Europe is trying to do at the same time. So Domenico raised a very good question. Can something be done in parallel to reduce the 180 days for new entities as well?
It's a great question, but the challenge is automatization and harmonization regulatory. With like COFEPRIS, we need trust in the other restricted agencies with more leveled in regulatory issues that COFEPRIS. This example is FDA, EMA, and TG8. These agencies has a more robust scientific and technical issues, then Cofepris optimized and activities of the in revision technical and scientific technical approved and recognized these certifies like good manufacturing process. I don't know I answered well that question.
You did, because your presentation was very comprehensive, but you also brought in the big issue of trust. And you have to trust in data, you have to trust in the agency, you have to trust in the industry. And I think we'll come back to this question in a while, because this is a huge question going forward. So Sylvia, we can bring in Camila right now and come back to these later on. Camila, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Welcome, everybody. My name is Camila Gomez. I work for Roche, but here I am in representation of FIPHARMA. Could you please, Keith, go to the next slide? Next one. Yes, good. So I'd like, first of all, to thank the IFAP Academy for this invitation. I'm very honored to be here at this at the virtual company of such a wonderful panel, right? And as I mentioned, I'm here on behalf of the Latin American Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry. And before we talk a little bit of the topics that I was invited to discuss with you, I, of course, as my other fellow colleagues, I have a poll question for you. So could you please put it on the screen, Keith, the poll question? So I'd like to know from you, what are the options below that do not represent a current gap for stakeholders' collaboration in America? So what is not a current gap? Okay, so tricky question. Distrust of governments towards private sector, maybe patient engagement, not yet a priority. There's a lack of local and regional platforms to promote collaboration, or maybe insufficient implementation of good regulatory practices. Let's give you some time to think, and then we'll see the results.
Wow, Camila, you've covered all the 4 issues in the region very nicely.
And I recognize that there's actually no right answer, because this is based on my perception as well. So Kitty, if you can put the results on the screen, please. Yes, so people would agree with me, and you'll see throughout the presentation that I also think that there is currently no lack of regional platforms to promote collaboration. We just have to make maybe a better use of them. So let's cover those topics right now. Next. So first, I would like to start with some personal touch here. I was very happy to be chosen for this talk, because for 2 years and 1 week now, I have been working for industry, but I'm a former regulator myself. I spent almost 15 years working for the Brazilian regulatory agency, Anvisa, in the Office of International Affairs, actually responsible most of the time by initiatives of international regional and international regulatory convergence, right? And I'm also have an education background on international cooperation. So I think that I'm a perfect fit to discuss with you these aligning stakeholder partnerships for delivering on the promise of healthcare innovations. I'm also very happy that FIPHARMA was chosen to be represented in this on this panel today, because partnership, a stakeholder partnership is at FIPHARMA's heart and its core function. So the sentences that you actually see on your screen are FIPHARMA's mission. And you see that the mission of FIPHARMA, you will recognize some key elements, right, essential to promoting partnerships: dialogue, collaboration, ethical principles. So my idea here today is to quickly bring you some real-life cases that highlight the benefits of the stakeholder collaboration. I'll be focusing on 2 cases. These are not the only ones, of course, but those 2 cases centered around FIPHARMA. And unfortunately, I do not have the time. I won't be able to explain in detail each one of those projects, but you will receive later on reference information with the links. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper and know about the project's results, etc., you have the opportunity to do so by accessing the information that IFAP is going to send to you. So the first project that I would like to touch here is what we call the Cpp Project. Is a FIPHARMA SecMed collaboration. SecMed, as mentioned already by Miriam, is the Cuban regulator. It's in SecMed and FIPharma in representation of industry, and SecMed on behalf of the regulatory authorities in the region under the scope, under the umbrella of the Pan-American Network for Drug Harmonization, right? What we call the PANDRA network. And this project is calling assessing CPP requirements for drug registration processes in the region of the Americas towards a more timely access to medicines and more convergent regulatory approaches. I bet all of you would be familiar. The CPP is the Certificate of Pharmaceutical Product. And the idea of this project was to conduct a mapping of the regulatory requirements around the CPP here in our region and the whole Americas, not only Latin America, to understand when the CPP would be required for registration, evaluate the benefits of this requirement in the Latin America and Caribbean and the Americas context, consider also the national needs of the countries here of the region and their national perspectives to contribute to the identification of opportunities to improve CPP requirements to have more timely access to drugs and more convergent approaches towards the use of CPP here in our region. We expect to finalize this project very, very soon. We were very, very lucky because we had the participation of 27 regulatory authorities of the region, 14 industry representatives, and also of the CRS, the Caribbean Regulatory System. So it's a very, very comprehensive study. And represents this type of thing around stakeholder collaboration to generate evidence to support regulatory change tailored to the needs of the region, which for me is a very, very nice example. And I could only invite you to learn a little bit more. And it expresses a great expression of what is on our DNA as FIPharma to promote, you know, this dialogue and this look for convergent approaches to similar problems that we have in different countries. So we were able to put together industry regulators from different backgrounds and scenarios, from the FDA to Haiti. All of them participated in this survey, and it was a privilege for us to compile this information and see such a rich regulatory environment here in the region, but also such a need for having more convergent approaches. Another initiative, FIPharma initiative that I would like to bring for you, because when we talk about collaboration, we're talking about industry and regulators, but you know, internal collaboration among industry representatives is also very, very important. And in the context of COVID-19 response, a task force was created within FIPharma for us to align some industry voices to ensure that COVID-19 response here in our region was, you know, better coordinated. So you will also have, we'll receive a link to this information, but basically what FIPharma did was to put together its members, that includes individual companies and also local industry associations in different countries, to discuss some regulatory issues in the context of health emergencies. And then we produced a very comprehensive and Latin America focused paper with some potential approaches to address the challenges for Latin America and the Caribbean in the light of the pandemic. This was published back in 2020, and the focus of this document was to let the industry voice be heard on how to ensure ongoing supply of medicines and vaccines when the normal production, supply chain, and business operations were completely and adversely impacted and massively challenged, right, by the pandemic. We did that in the very beginning of the pandemic. It has been more than 1 year that we started working on this paper, right? And we recognize that the pandemic posed challenges to all regulatory authorities in the region, regardless of their size and their maturity. And with that, we came up with some general considerations around, for instance, regulatory processes, how to deal when you have an increased workload, but reduce personnel and reduce work capacity because everybody was trying to work from home, how to introduce efficiencies, so, like those efficiencies that already mentioned by Miriam to you, reliance, creating emergency pathways, introducing the possibility of rolling reviews, other issues that we tackle in this paper, and how to maintain supply, how to introduce maybe some temporary measures to waive certain regulatory requirements like legalizations, apostillation, or accepting different labels when the products were intended to be deployed in one country, but now had to be diverted to another country because of supply issues. And also we addressed the need of flexibilities around activating new or additional production sites as we were trying to ramp up production, right, amidst the pandemic. And finally, also we address the need for some coordination of research and development and also facilitating clinical research in a pandemic scenario, like accepting decentralized trials where instead of the patient going to the center goes to the patient, right? And also the acceptance of the role for observational data in regulatory decision-making, in famous real-world data or real-world evidence. And now that we are moving to this phase, this pandemic will very, very soon be finally over, hopefully, and we are moving to this phase when stakeholder dialogue will be necessary to ensure that the lessons learned from COVID-19 will be transported into our regulatory future. Regulatory knowledge changed, production changed, supply changed, regulators changed, and also awareness of patients about the importance of the regulatory activities and regulatory requirements changed because of the pandemic. So our invitation here is that we have to reach new agreements to ensure that these changes are positive and they are also sustainable. Next slide, please. So on the core of this project that I mentioned to you from FIPHARMA is the message that not a single company or not a single stakeholder alone will be able to reach the same results, right? And here, making this link to what Praveen said and Miriam said, the element behind all that is trust. An overall environment of distrust, unfortunately, distrust on the private sector is still very present here in Latin America. And as a former visa regulator, being there for 15 years, when the agency really reached a level of maturity, which is now comparable to the greatest regulatory authorities in the world, I can say that I was a witness of how interconnected the level of maturity of a regulatory system is to the level of collaboration that the agency has with external stakeholders. And collaboration requires trust, and trust requires transparency. In the screen, you're actually seeing some sentences that I took out of a very important guideline that was published by WHO this year, a guideline on good regulatory practices that has been discussed for quite a while. The first draft from WHO was published back in 2016. And as a result of stakeholder collaboration and intensive dialogue, we reached this very, very nice WHO guideline that was published this year. And my intention in bringing that to you is just because the implementation of transparency as a value and other key good regulatory practices is still a gap here for in Latin America from all sides, but also from the regulator's side. And in the end, what I would like to remind here is that we are all industry and agencies. We are all in this game with the same intentions, right? Is to have better results for our patients. So that's why I included the arrows and the, the focus on the patient. Building trust, it's key so that we can reach our patients. We are not on different sides, right? Different stakeholders, they just take different roles to achieve maybe at the same point in the regulatory journey. We converge where the patient is. So this is why we should guide regulatory science, regulatory dialogue, regulatory progress, regulatory actions, regulatory requirements, thinking on the back of our mind, the patient must be there. We are doing regulations, we are promoting knowledge, we are producing so that it reaches the patient and make their lives better. So hearing the voice of the patient in Latin America, as I mentioned in the poll, is still a challenge for governments and industry alike here in our region. And maybe we should start thinking jointly of some solutions to this problem. Next slide, please. I always like to finish some presentations that I have with this picture and those sentences that were said in 2018 by Dr. Tedros, who's now complete, everywhere in the world. He's probably the most recognizable face after the pandemic, right? And I like to close with this message, with this call for action that Dr. Tedros made for governments and all other stakeholders back in 2018. We do have here in Latin America the platforms for collaboration at the local and at the regional levels. We have seen examples of these platforms in Larry and Miriam's presentation. They are, as I mentioned, local, regional, and global initiatives that promote regulatory convergence and that promote regulatory collaboration with the participation of many different stakeholders, not only regulators. My invitation here for you as industry representative is let's leverage those platforms. Let's make the best use of them. Let's expand them so they are more inclusive, right? And let's answer finally the call for action from our Director General from the World Health Organization and look for new ways of working together to deliver results for our patients. Thanks a lot. This is the end of my presentation, and I give the podium back to Praveen and Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Camila. That was a great presentation. Thanks. Thanks so much. So we open the podium now for questions. Have our Q&A now.
Yeah, in fact, questions have been pouring in, and Sylvia, if you want to trigger off some start, we can then hold some of these, and maybe even the panelists can ask each other a question. Would you?
Sure.
So, go ahead, kick off. Sorry, you had a question.
Thank you very much. This is from Josue. Josue, nice to see you. It's great to have you here. Speaking of the harmonization process in terms of ICH guidelines, several legislation in the region already refer to the use of these guidelines. However, the detail of the actions to be implemented locally are subject of small adjustments between inverted commas, that turn out to be big challenges to not only be harmonized, but to benefit from this harmonized state. Question, how could you try to close this first gap, since now we are evolving our conversation in terms of reliance? It's a great question. Anybody would like to take on this challenging answer?
Maybe I can take with my personal take. I'm not sure if I'm a representative 100% of the industry voice here, but I'll try. Very challenging questions, José. Thank you so much. Harmonization, is a very important concept, and should I say a very old one, that we have been striving in different places to reach. And over time, this concept evolved or progressed into a concept of convergence, right? Where you can have slightly differences, you can be respectful of the national differences, but arrive at the same place. And convergence is key for us to build trust. We have to recognize that it's not possible because different agencies have different levels of maturity, have different resources, have different capacities right, for all of them to perform at the same activities at the same level. So this is why we talk about regulatory convergence. We have to be respectful of the differences when scientifically justifiable, of course, right? And include them looking for more convergent criteria in regulations, right? That in the end will reach the same goal, even if they take different roads, right? So I would say that my take is that it's less harmonized and more converge towards those regulatory requirements, international guidelines and standards, and that this will solve some of those issues. Of course, that we still see that country-specific requirements are created on top of those convergent regulatory requirements. And this is where dialogue, transparency, and the discussions, trust comes in, right? We have to dialogue for us to understand how those those small changes can be converted into big problems, right, for a specific country, and how to solve them, being respectful of the regulatory framework in a given country.
Great. I think it shouldn't be big problems, it should be big solutions now. So let's bring in the regulator voice. Miriam?
Yes, totally accord with Camila. Reliance is the first step, but regulatory convergence with all international standards in the most important and real step for the regulatory agency to have the necessary scientific and technical soundness to ensure access to medicines. It's more important than ever, going together industry, academic, and regulatory agencies for the wellness of countries.
Great. Larry?
I was going back to the results of the poll, and it was interesting because with regard to the polls, people rated things like having better international collaboration and having the right local and regional platforms to promote collaboration as being really critical. And I think that's the common theme for today, is that having the dialogue across the stakeholders is important. Trying to use international best practices is important, but also recognizing that those need to be adjusted to what I would call being fit for purpose for each of the agencies, so that not every agency can use every international guideline in the same way, but there should be a basis, a baseline for using those international standards and guidelines to promote trust and then to promote this concept of convergence.
Great point. I know we are running close to time. We probably have a time for one or two more quick questions with quick answers. So let's take one from Carlos, which has just come in. And it's an important one because we talked about cross-functional collaboration. This is related, but while the processes are being harmonized between the regulators and the industry and the academia and the scientific community, there's a lag between the reimbursement process and the access process and the payer bodies. Latin America, the US is a great example. Latin America is a great example, less likely in Europe, but there is a challenge. What are the thoughts here? How do we bring the reimbursement process so that the patient and the advocacy groups are not disadvantaged? Miriam?
I'm sorry, I understand well the question.
So what we were asking was, how do you get the payer community, like the reimbursement bodies, to be in sync with where the regulations are taking us? There's a lag. And so the patient is still at disadvantage. How do you improve that gap?
The best challenge is one simple step is communication and cooperation between all the sectors in our countries. It's a simple step, but it's difficult to do the implementation. But it's right.
Praveen, if I could jump in.
Sorry, yes, Larry,
very
yes,
quickly.
Of course.
One of the concepts that we've just touched on briefly was the concept of what you might call pre-submission advice and having interactions with agencies And in this case, also trying to align those interactions with the health technology assessor or the payer so that there's an aligned expectation of what kind of data package will be delivered and then how they will make their decision around not only quality, safety, and efficacy, but also value. So it comes back to communications, as Miriam said, but knowing what kind of data package can meet those goals.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Larry and Miriam brought here. Please note that I'm a representative of the regulatory voice and not the reimbursement and access side. But lessons learned from how we streamline and how we make the best use of the resources and dialogues with the between industry and regulators for regulatory approvals can serve as an inspiration, for instance, for us to deal with HTA agencies as well, right? So there are some important lessons, not only good practices, but also bad practices that we might take into account, right, when promoting this dialogue. And I think that the trend in the future is that there is more and more communication and dialogue between those agencies at the national level, because even though the regulatory approval is the door to access, it does not solely grant that the medicine is actually going to get to the patient. So more and more you have to have streamlined processes, dialogue, and understanding also set so that we can also keep the integrity of the regulatory procedures, so that they are not, when we talk about regulatory procedures, we're talking about quality, safety, and efficacy evaluation. And these are greatly, in a great part, scientific knowledge, and science is the one that is leading the way here. When for HTAs, we also have other elements that might impact a choice for a reimbursement or not of a medicine. So that's why it's important that those activities connect, but they are also independent from each other, right? Because the values behind those different activities are different values. And this is a very important issue, and it's also a recommendation from WHO. If you go to the global benchmarking tool for evaluating regulatory systems, this independence of the regulatory from the payer system at the local level is one of the requirements for you to have a mature or a system that is considered mature in any given country.
Wonderful. Sylvia, any closing remarks? I know we've a little past the time. I'll wrap up, but any closing remarks, Sylvia?
Well, I wish we could all have discussed a little bit more regarding, this is a really wonderful topic, but I would really like to see how we can access to innovation and everybody work together. And there is a possibility of having a task force in Latin America, working together with all the national regulatory authorities. I know the key stakeholders that Larry showed that wonderful slide with that advancement that's the SECMED put together, the Office of Innovation. That would be great. So that would be for another webinar. That would be wonderful.
There you go. So in fact, we're leaving on a very positive note that there is still a lot, and you brought in important words about communication, about transparency, about trust, and the need to harmonize and regulate. But at the same time, one point did come up very strongly is integrity and independence. And clearly, one of the challenges we faced at running at this warp speed is that are we really relaxing standards? And that's not what is happening here. We have to understand that we actually elevated the standards. And this is where this communication to the public, to the advocacy groups is going to be very critical. But as Camila and as Miriam and Larry and Sylvia, of course, you have engendered, we have set the stage for future communications. So before we close today, it behooves me to thank all of you. Again, once again, Sylvia for driving this, Miriam for stepping in and representing not only just the enlightened regulator, but also a partner, and Camila coming in with voices, with your background and with going forward. And I can sense the passion here to bring all of you into a next session. And Larry, we've worked, and you bring a certain raison d'etre to all these things. So thanks so much for the regulatory sciences pushing it and making sure that we deliver on our promises. And it also behoves me to thank the audience. We've had an audience stick on for the entire session, large Latin America presence, but also there's a large global presence because Latin America is part of a global community, and it's a quid pro quo and a win-win. And also end with thanking Kit and the operations team for a flawless execution once again. Till the next time, happy journeys, and once again, big thank you, great collaboration and teamwork going forward. Thank you all, and have a lovely day.